Hello guys, today we will be talking about what if Naruto and Hinata were silent prodigies part 10. If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe. Now let's begin. If there were ever a drawback to sleeping, Naruto held the market on it. Possessing a nine-tailed fox demon whose only means of communication resided within unconsciousness wasn't exactly an alluring notion to many, but what could be done about it? May as well get this over with. Truth be told, he didn't believe it too unbearable. The monster housed in his gut didn't torment him every night. It was only when it really wanted to talk, or the Uzumaki faced a sincere life or death scenario, that these generally unpleasant conversations took place. Tonight, it was the former. The blonde sloshed through the stagnant waters of his psyche to the familiar gates that held back the overwhelming evil force, stopping short so that the massive claws wouldn't reach him. Gazing into the dark eyes of the entity, he stated, "You don't look too happy. What do you want such insolence?" It sneered. "I would very much enjoy feasting on your bones if I were free. Yeah, well, you're not. Deal with it. Is that all you wanted to say? Throw one or two threats my way." Then the ground rumbled and the warm fluid rippled outward as the demon laughed. "Of course not, foolish one. I merely wish to remind you of your own torment." As you rest, Dottie raised an eyebrow in confusion. "My own torment? What the hell do you know full well of what I speak? The BMC, girl. The what girl? I forgot, you mortals refer to it as the Byakugan. Hinata?" He blinked, immediately raising his guard. "You touch her, you die." Once again, the environment shook in response to the evil entity's guffawing. "And how would you do this?" "You rely on my power for healing and increasing your reserves. If anything," it smirked, "you would lose control of my powers and kill her yourself." Naruto compassed himself, taking deep breaths to calm his flaring temper. He learned long ago that arguing with the fox was futile. Responding to its threats and taunts only increased the intensity of its verbal jabs. "You called her the BMC girl. Why? What's BMC?" The demon's grin died away when it realized its short-lived fun was at an end. "That is the original name of the bloodline that came to become the Byakugan. Original name?" He paused, recalling the strange name the fox once assigned to the Uchiha's eyes. "Is that like the Sharingan being called the Shangri-La mutagen?" "Precisely." "And?" he goaded. "And what?" came the haughty reply. "Why are they called that? What does that mean?" "BMC is short for blind man's compensation. When humans with chakra went blind and began developing a sixth sense in place of sight, that was the name assigned that condition." The blonde drank this in and voiced another inquiry. "Then what about this Shangri-La mutagen? How is that related to the Sharingan?" "I already told you, foolish boy, it is the Sharingan." Or rather, trailed off for a moment. "It would be more accurate to say the Sharingan evolved from it, much like the Byakugan evolved from BMC. But what was it originally?" "You say the Byakugan evolved from something different." If there were ever a drawback to sleeping, Naruto held the market on it. Possessing a nine-tailed fox demon whose only means of communication resided within unconsciousness wasn't exactly an alluring notion to many, but what could be done about it? May as well get this over with. Truth be told, he didn't believe it too unbearable. The monster housed in his gut didn't torment him every night. It was only when it really wanted to talk, or the Uzumaki faced a sincere life or death scenario, that these generally unpleasant conversations took place. Tonight, it was the former. The blonde sloshed through the stagnant waters of his psyche to the familiar gates that held back the overwhelming evil force, stopping short so that the massive claws wouldn't reach him. Gazing into the dark eyes of the entity, he stated, "You don't look too happy. What do you want such insolence?" It sneered. "I would very much enjoy feasting on your bones if I were free. Yeah, well, you're not. Deal with it. Is that all you wanted to say? Throw one or two threats my way." Then the ground rumbled and the warm fluid rippled outward as the demon laughed. "Of course not, foolish one. I merely wish to remind you of your own torment." As you rest, Dottie raised an eyebrow in confusion. "My own torment? What the hell do you know full well of what I speak? The BMC girl. The what girl? I forgot, you mortals refer to it as the Byakugan. Hinata?" He blinked, immediately raising his guard. "You touch her, you die." Once again, the environment shook in response to the evil entity's guffawing. "And how would you do this?" "You rely on my power for healing and increasing your reserves. If anything," it smirked, "you would lose control of my powers and kill her yourself." Naruto compassed himself, taking deep breaths to calm his flaring temper. He learned long ago that arguing with the fox was futile. Responding to its threats and taunts only increased the intensity of its verbal jabs. "You called her the BMC girl. Why? What's BMC?" The demon's grin died away when it realized its short-lived fun was at an end. "That is the original name of the bloodline that came to become the Byakugan. Original name?" He paused, recalling the strange name the fox once assigned to the Uchiha's eyes. Is that like the Sharingan being called the Shangri-La mutagen precisely? And, he goaded. And what? Came the haughty reply. Why are they called that? What does that mean? BMC is short for blind man's compensation. When humans with chakra went blind and began developing a sixth sense in place of sight, that was the name assigned that condition. The blonde drank this in and voiced another inquiry. Then what about this Shangri-La mutagen? How is that related to the Sharingan? I already told you, foolish boy, it is the Sharingan. Or rather, it trailed off for a moment. It would be more accurate to say the Sharingan evolved from it, much like the Byakugan evolved from BMC. But what was it originally? You say the Byakugan evolved from something different, so what was the Shangri-La mutagen? What was its purpose? For a while the monstrous beast said nothing, silent as if contemplating. The strain? Raw materials? Omega Project? Naruto's mind raced with so many simultaneous questions that he didn't know where to begin. Oddly enough, he realized that the evil force's choice of words was a bit off, so that became his opening inquiry. Back up, you said those with chakra. Isn't that a given? After all, every living thing on the planet possessed some amount of the living energy, right? The demon gave a disconcerting smile in reply. That's what you think. With that, the monster forced the teen from the mental landscape and watched the outside world through the rousing boy's deep cerulean eyes, grimacing at what it saw. I don't like her, that split personality girl, it thought upon viewing the outside world through the teen's eyes. She may not be nearly as intelligent as that boy, but that seal her other half created could be disastrous for me. I can only hope she never puts one on him. The Uzumaki frowned as his eyes acclimated to the sudden light, mentally swearing at the bastard fox for giving him far too many questions that he cared to contemplate in his current situation. What the hell did he mean? He mused as his extremities began accepting commands from his awakening brain. The Sharingan and the Shangri-La mutagen, the Byakugan and the BMC, Omega Project, what does it all mean? His inner contemplations didn't end there, and that annoyed him to no end. Gah, I'm up for 2 seconds, and I'm already feeling a headache coming on. This sucks. He moved his hand and raised an eyebrow. Since when do I own a furry pillow? Wait, what? His free hand instinctively flung the covers off his bed, allowing him to peer down at what was pinning his occupied limb, a snoozing Shia. At least she's wearing actual clothes this time, he thought, blushing at the previous evening's bath incident that ultimately led to the girl's choice of concealing wardrobe. Now that his mind was firmly focused on the younger girl, he began to think about what she meant to him. Sure, I've got Hinata, she's beautiful, sweet, and I'm pretty sure she likes me, but then, so is Shia. The rational portion of his brain stepped in and he began earnestly categorizing the girl's differences. She is really cute, she'll be a real looker in a few years, and I know for a fact that she likes me. But what do I feel towards her? I always thought this is what a family felt like, but is that really true? Do I really see like a sister? He concluded, figuring that particular familial relation to be the one he was searching for. As Naruto dealt with his conflicting emotions, Shia stirred under his arm with consciousness gradually fading into existence. She blinked wearily and took a deep breath, giving the barest of smiles as she recognized the scent, before nuzzling against the soft fabric pressed onto her face. Seconds went by, and it finally registered in her mind what was going on, and her head snapped up so quickly that it was a wonder her neck didn't break. Auburn eyes wide as could be, she gazed at the blonde within extreme proximity. Kaya, she yelped as she moved so fast that she put Kakashi to shame, launching herself out of the small bed and clinging to the corner of the room, while glued to the ceiling. Curse, couldn't help it, he had the best joke for the moment. Couldn't resist me after last night. It wasn't me, she instantly returned with a new shade of red plastered on her face. I didn't do it. It was Aya. It's her fault. It wasn't me who, come on. She obeyed and, after clambering down the wall, received a strong hand ruffling her messy brown hair. Once said palm was removed, she peered up at the yawning blonde, and an embarrassed smile broke out on her features. I've just got to forget about that, she analyzed, just got to forget about last night. Got to forget? You're welcome, Aya piped up with a tone that would be accompanied by her trademark sly grin, had she control of a pair of lips. Shut up, she shouted at the second personality, realizing too late that she was actually using her outward voice. Naruto laughed at the outburst and started towards the kitchen. As he passed the flustered girl, he hooked her neck in a friendly arm and joked, fantasizing so early in the morning? You dirty girl, you curse. She whined like the kid she was. You're so mean to say Sai was an unusual boy, was like saying the sky was kind of blue. The blank teen was socially clueless and possessed the oddest of techniques in the form of artwork. Even his true name had long been erased, lost to the emotional meat grinder known as the Root Training Program. Despite all that, the most important thing about him was that he was indeed affiliated with the Root program, even if he willingly disregarded his old teacher for the sake of rediscovering his humanity. These days, it was this singular fact that attracted extra attention from a select. Said teen was at the rendezvous point early. Punctuality had been drilled into his psyche, though he no longer associated with Danzo. Of course, since his current instructor was the infamously tardy Kakashi, this admirable trait was utterly wasted. He was the only ninja there. As the minutes passed, it became clear that the others weren't going to show until much later, per their superior's chronic belatedness. He mulled around for a bit before realizing that the forest around the empty training ground was unnervingly calm. The birds vacated the area with their usual gusto, and the local woodland mammals followed suit, albeit in a subtle manner. Sai instantly raised his guard when he understood he might not be alone, and, sure enough, he wasn't at a nearby shrubbery, so he tossed a handful of throwing stars into the bushes. A loud harsh yelp sounded off, and one of the shuriken V dodged it, while unearthing his painting tools, when an odd observation struck him. Was that shuriken smoking? Glancing back, he found that the steel weapon was slowly melting as a crimson fluid bubbled atop its surface. How odd, he commented lowly before receiving an unexpected boot to the face. That hurt, damn it. A decidedly feminine voice shouted as the iron-plated footwear ground into his gut to keep him in place against the dirt. The boy began utilizing his chakra to replace his vulnerable body with a glut of ink, but more of the searing red liquid dripped down onto his portable container, and it also began to melt. He peered up in alarm, half expecting the strange acid to drip on his face, and almost blinked in surprise to find it coming from an open wound in an older girl's hand. Well, the redeeted girl demanded, flicking her wrist to somehow retract the blood oozing from her palm, before the affected flesh began closing, with the help of a minute amount of medical chakra. You gonna gape at me like a fish all day? Come on, who are you? He replied calmly despite having a painful boot grind further into his bare stomach. I'm the one asking questions here, albino. She hissed, obviously upset for whatever reason. And what's with this outfit? You gay or something? Geez, why do I gotta interrogate the fag boys? She trailed off. So what do you want? The emotionless teen continued, hoping that she would get off if he satisfied her curiosity. If she's this upset already, he mused, perhaps I can get some information out of her. You worked for Danzo, right? Her voice died down a bit, but she was still visibly pissed. That is correct. Where's the Root complex, then? A split second passed as he formulated an excuse. There is no central headquarters. There are only meetings, and those vary from place to place. Horse shit. She shrieked and reopened her previous wound. This time, however, the acidic blood snaked outward and drifted perilously close to the captive male's head. I know that's a lie. His operatives come out at one spot. Now where is it? Once again, he attempted to come up with a good lie. Perhaps providing false coordinates would do the trick. Then at least I can warn Kakashi of this girl. Might want to do what she says. A smiling face leaned over the prone boy's head, muddy green eyes and wily dyed hair, giving off an overly lax vibe. The newcomer came closer and whispered, it's that time of the month. You know, time of the month? Sai wondered before outwardly recalling a fact about female physiology he once read in a book. It's her period. Damn right. Said girl's foot threatened to give him a hernia, and I'm a Nashin. Do you have any idea how much it sucks to be a Nashin on her period? I got metal undies on, for God's sake. Anyway, the seemingly high emerald-eyed boy remarked as he staggered away, it'd be a good idea to answer Bloody Mary's questions. Don't call me that. The Nashin replied to her swaying companion, I could melt your face off with my crotch right now. Not a good time to fuck with me. Sorry, the apparent addict conceded before extracting a syringe brimming with a violet liquid. Here's a peace offering. He brandished the needle as he made his way to the trapped pale boy. Loaded Pinky up with this stuff over there. She'd lick your feet now if you told her to. Sai glanced at the designated host. Just a little something to zone you out, the older teen replied with a smirk and a highly amused chuckle. He jabbed the needle into the target's arm and promptly emptied the connected tube into Sai's bloodstream. You're probably not gonna remember this conversation, he informed the affected teen, as the effects of the drug started kicking in, or anything else for the next hour. The pale boy's mind began to feel lighter than air, and the environment suddenly seemed so distant. All his previous worries about escaping alive or at least warning someone of his redeeted captor became moot points. Why were those important? He honestly wondered, unable to even realize that those thoughts were the results of the narcotic running through his veins rather than his own mental processes. I never knew there were so many colors. Oh, she's talking to me now. The Nation ground her armored foot one final time into the doped-up former underling of Danzo, mildly pleased that he now appeared more responsive than before. Where's the root complex located and where's its entrance as the afternoon waned? So did Anko's temperament. She had been searching for Curse the entire day to no avail whatsoever, and now she had finally resigned herself to stalking Danzo, or at least get as close as she could without arousing suspicion within the alleged root organization. Sadly, such hopes were too extravagant for the moment. She had gotten nowhere. Course, it's only been one day, she muttered inwardly for consolation. Anko, Kurenai approached her sulking friend from the opposite end of the busy market street. Can't say I see you around this part of the village too often. She glared at her friend with sleepy eyes. Looking for Dan, she caught herself. The walls had ears in Konoha. Dango shops. Seen any around? Interestingly, the Yui caught on to her comrade's mistake and compounded on the insinuation. Not around here. No, I haven't seen any. She winked. Tell you what, how about I treat you to an actual meal? There's a really nice stand over there. The Mitarashi continued, her weary gaze unabated, an awkward silence passing before she let loose an uncouth yawn. You still talking in code, or you serious? Come on, the crimson-eyed ninja stated with an exacerbated tone as she at the fellow Kunoichi's arm and dragged her into said restaurant. They commandeered a pair of empty chairs against a wall, and she stared her tired friend down. You look exhausted. How long has it been since you slept? Once again, another drawn-out yawn. Not since yesterday night. Been looking for, well, you know. Dango shops? She reiterated with no minor degree of slyness. No, this the seal. The violet-haired woman patted the base of her neck over the patch of flesh affected by her former teacher's parting gift. Your curse seal. Kurenai knew exactly what the opposing female meant. Looking for a solution? Yeah, Anko nodded, propping open a menu to scan its contents. Can't find hide nor hair of it anywhere though. Not even the ghost. Her lips were silenced by a glare filled with caution from across the table. The Yui eventually admitted her understanding with a slight bow of the head. I know what you mean, I haven't seen anything either. She folded her menu after deciding on a dish. I ran into Kakashi earlier today. The illusion mistress changed the topic. He mentioned something interesting about his team. That lazy bastard? What did he have to say? Well, to begin, apparently one of his charges belongs to the Dango shops, or at least he used to. Not even Kakashi's sure what to think about him. Really? This caught the sweet lover's attention, and her wide eyes betrayed her intrigue. Think we can use this kid? She shook her head. That thing? The Yui wondered aloud, leaning in to obtain a closer look. Are those straps on the sides? Even better, the supported Mitarashi continued, her curiosity currently stronger than her residing pain. Why is it shaped like panties? Phew. A certain addict plopped onto the dim cool ground and whacked the back of his head against the stone wall. That was close. Nice move. He and his redeeted comrade had narrowly avoided capture by evading their pursuer long enough to find a hole that led into the hive beneath Konoha. Nuren, the Nation female replied with the promise of torment and death lining her voice. I swear to God, if you look this way I'll kill you. Huh? Why's? Because my pants burned off. Nah, it's cool. You're still wearing undies, those melted off too, dipshit. Wait, then why can't I look? The tone of his voice spoke volumes to his drug-induced stupidity. Moron. A punch accompanied the insult, rendering the druggie temporarily unconscious against the cavern floor. Oh hell, now I gotta drag him back. Hinata sat idly in her private chamber wondering what her newest machine was capable of. Granted, she considered it a gift of repentance from the stoner squatting in her lap, but he seemed confident enough that it worked tremendously well. Of course, he also calls the crystal a plague, so him being sure of himself isn't really that reassuring. She had to resist the urge to test it out today. It was too risky. In order to perform a field application with the device, she would have to sneak out of her room and go missing from the village in broad daylight in order to execute techniques with a machine that could potentially alert the entire city to her location. That simply would not do. So instead, she took the advice of her favorite blonde. She relaxed. Deciding for a change of scenery, she took up a comfortable position overlooking one of the lavish estate's many gardens. Hanabi passed by, uttering grunts of irritation and still scratching like mad from Shia's prank. Even after 5 consecutive baths, the itching powder so cautiously applied to her body didn't wash off completely. The intelligent Hyuga giggled inwardly at her snotty siblings' deserved misfortunes before her mind wandered. It's such a beautiful day. I wish I could spend it with Naruto. Thoughts of the teen brought forth familiar warmth within her chest which she did not contest. I wonder what will happen after we dispose of Danzo? The logical portion of her overactive brain kicked in at that observation. That is, assuming Danzo doesn't get the best of us. We don't even know the extent of his forces. For that matter, he may not be alone. She briefly recalled the two strangers that miraculously entered and exited her lab via flashes of light in a successful attempt to acquire Mosh's aging corpse. I'm actually hoping those guys are with him. The last thing we need are unknown enemies. But what if they aren't? What if they're really a third party? And what about that shadow man that slaughtered the Sound's reconnaissance force during Orochimaru's invasion? Is he with Danzo? Is he with those two intruders? Could he even be with a fourth party? Shuddering at that idea, she realized someone was calling her name. Why yes, Hinata, her nearby cousin Niji appeared worried. Are you alright? Why yes, I'm fine. I called your name several times, yet you did not respond. Are you not? I think she is lying, the self-proclaimed genius concluded. She seemed distracted rather than ill. Her eyes displayed inward reflection, but I cannot say whether or not they were pleasant thoughts. Deciding that his younger cousin held an aura of mystery about her that defied explanation, even going beyond the bounds of her infatuation with the Uzumaki, his pale eyes followed after her route. Hinata Hyuga, is there something you are hiding? As the sun dipped into the late afternoon sky, Naruto enjoyed his day off. He had hoped to see Hinata in the village, but this was not to be. His daily facade of a routine simply did not coincide with her own withdrawn projections. Oh well, he brushed it off as he laid back on his bed, thoroughly basking in the soft comfort of the musty mattress. See her again tomorrow night. It's not like we go that long without seeing each other anyway. But before he could ponder any further on the blue-haired prodigy, a certain younger girl flew through the air and landed on him with a cheer and a wide goofy smile. Hi curse, she happily exclaimed now that her face was no, he answered while running a hand through her messy auburn hair. I'm too tired for that. I can't go for several days without sleep, it's not healthy. Oh, she cooed, obviously taking great pleasure in being so close to the object of her affection. So you're just staying in tonight? Yep, the Uzumaki replied with a smile. All right. She hopped to her feet and proclaimed with exaggerated victory, then I'm making dinner. He laughed at her gusto, realizing that she was blatantly imitating his idiotic visage. Sure. She giggled and clapped her palms together. I'm so happy. She cheered, dinner with curse, and promptly obeyed as Naruto strode to the door and opened it to reveal one of the people who used to annoy him most. Hell, he mused, she hasn't gotten much better. Her personality still sucks eggs. Hey, Naruto, Sakura greeted the instant their eyes met. Can I come in? Never stopped you before, he whined inwardly, while concealing his inherent dislike with a grin. Sure, thanks. The female medic stepped in and began unconsciously examining the room, mentally checking herself before she could make any offhanded comments on the home's relatively poor condition. Hey, I need to talk to you about something. Yeah, sure, he replied. This could either be really good or really bad. Keep your fingers crossed, Uzumaki. She took a seat on his couch, prompting the blonde to sit opposite her on a stool. Curse would have brought up the subtle rudeness of the setup, but he simply didn't care anymore. When we met up with Kakashi this morning, you showed up kind of late. I'm not mad about that. She waved that off, strangely non-confrontational regarding his tardiness, but when Kakashi showed up, I don't remember having to wait for long. His azure eyes scrunched up. What do you mean? Well, how do I put this? I remember leaving to arrive on time, and then was suddenly there 2 hours later when Kakashi finally showed up. Wow, you must have been really tired, the teen commented. Might be Hinata's doing, but I thought she was also going to take it easy today. It's not that. She denied his simple explanation. Sai also doesn't remember anything? Well, he said something about a Bloody Mary, but even he doesn't know what that's about. Blood? Must have been that Garaza chick. If Sakura was drugged this badly, then Nurin was probably involved too. It's just, she continued, it bothers me. I just had to share this with someone. Oh yeah, sure holy. He cut himself off too late. He was surprised when a pair of auburn eyes popped out from behind the couch and glared daggers into the back of Sakura's head. What's up with you? The Haruno inquired snidely, turning to examine whatever was behind her due to noticing her teammates' wandering eyes. Finding nothing, she faced the seated boy once again on cue. His eyes rose from behind the furniture again, this time with a certain harshness in them that only showed up in Aya. Oh good lord, Naruto mentally begged the disturbed girl, don't do anything stupid. Aya, as if understanding him, the second personality obeyed, albeit mockingly. As the Uzumaki downplayed his sudden reaction to make himself appear a mere fool, before continuing the meaningless conversation, the alter ego switched positions several times. With each change, she imitated some kind of mock-killing blow to the blissfully unaware older medic, all the while sporting something of a cross between a sly smile and an annoyed sneer across her features. After a while it appeared like a child dancing wildly, though that was kind of the case anyway. After a handful of nerve-wracking minutes, the blonde prodigy finally wrapped things up with the Haruno and got her out of his apartment. Once he was certain she was out of earshot, he turned to the smug Mincid and hissed, "What the hell were you doing?" Aya merely grinned at him with her odd smirk. "Fun stuff, eh? I think there's something to that subliminal messaging thing. You could have blown our cover." "Why did you do that?" "Hey, I helped get rid of her, didn't I? Only because I had to act faster, and that's bad because any joviality in her mood was now obliterated. Apparently, she didn't appreciate her actions being questioned by anyone despite the circumstances." Naruto breathed deeply to calm himself. "I had it under control," he stated once his head was a tad clearer. "That was an unnecessary risk. That's all. Well," she crossed her arms, mildly angered that she received no thanks. "I don't like Pinky. She pisses me off. Why do you say that?" He didn't like Sakura either, but he knew her. "I didn't. Shia doesn't like her either," the aggressive personality continued, ignoring the inquiry altogether. "She let me take control to make her leave. Again." "Why?" The secondary Mincid said nothing in reply, but her face warmed to the lowest shade of red available before her special seal cooled and her consciousness gave way to Shia. The dominant girl's kinder auburn eyes blinked and the primary self said, "I just don't like her." The undercover genius sighed. He knew once his adopted family put her foot down there was no hope of prying information out of her. Fine, fine. He mulled about his living room for a minute longer, noting that the younger girl didn't move. Didn't you say we would eat together tonight, right?" Her youthful cheeriness returned in an instant, and she made way for the kitchen. "I've got something really good in mind. All right, I'm gonna be in the shower." The moment he announced his plan, he regretted it. He still hadn't forgotten the bath incident from the previous evening. Apparently neither had Shia, if her skeptical wide eyes were any indication. "No," he aimed a finger at her, "we're not going through that again. Yeah, she nodded rapidly in agreement, hastening her way, so that she— "Great," Naruto murmured to no one, "back here again." He knew this location to be buried within his psyche, the prison of the ever-mysterious fox. The teen didn't particularly care to be here, but there were questions that nagged him horribly. The origins of the Sharingan, the evolution of the Byakugan, and, most importantly, this Omega project mentioned during his previous visit. "Back so soon, boy?" The massive force stirred behind its cage. "I had hoped to never see your face again. That is, unless I was about to consume you." "Shut it," he retorted coldly. "I've got questions and you're gonna answer." The dank waters shook at the demon's roaring laughter. "I am amused to no end by your impudence. You are such a fool to believe that I will obey your command. Then whose command would you obey?" "The Sharingan's only those who wield the Shangri-La mutagen," it replied with a sneer, "but even that is not all-powerful." "Then what is?" the blonde demanded. He grew weary of the fox's vocal ambiguity. "Is it the Byakugan, the BMC?" Once again, the ground trembled from the monstrous laughter. "The BMC is a natural evolution of those crippled by the loss of sight. It merely senses different spectrums of light. It controls nothing." "Then what does?" he repeated angrily. "What's stronger than the Sharingan? Tell me." "The angel eyes," the beast chuckled. "Angel eyes?" The Uzumaki muttered introspectively. "Is it an origin name for another bloodline?" "Of sorts. Which bloodline?" The demonic power grinned widely and bared its teeth to its warden. "It gets dull sitting in this prison. My only source of entertainment is watching you struggle through your eyes. Just answer the damn question. I shall give you reply, boy, but I will not reveal it to you. I expect you shall go through great pains to understand my riddle." It paused and smiled as the boy below groaned. "Let those who possess the eyes of the angels hold the key to the gates of paradise. None who possess the key shall enter unto heaven. Paradise shall be denied them, and eternal suffering shall await their wayward soul." "What the hell?" The blonde raised an eyebrow at the proverb. "What a shitty answer. The people of ancient times spoke differently than the ones of today. That is the best I can translate using your pitiful language." "Ancient times? How old we talking here? 400 years?" He threw a number out. 500? Yet again, the fox laughed in his face. "You cannot fathom the complexity of time. Even I," it emphasized its own "I grow weary of your ignorance." The evil force cut him off. "Awaken in your world with my riddle on your mind. Be sure to rack your brain for the answer to entertain me." The Uzumaki attempted to argue further, but simply vanished into thin air as his true consciousness stirred. When he was gone, the fox muttered to itself, "Your life is far more peaceful than you think. Even the bloodshed on the day of your birth is nothing compared to the night I was created. As another morning rose in the village of Konoha, Naruto blinked his slumber away in the early morning light with little amusement. Once again, the damnable fox left him with more questions than answers. And I even forgot to ask about that Omega project, he bemoaned inwardly. But before he could ponder his frustration further, he felt something clinging onto him. It took no effort to know what it was. Seriously, he honestly wondered, why do I bother once again? Shia was sleeping on top of him. What is this, routine? Never mind that the younger girl usually began below his mattress on her own futon on the floor, she always ended up in his much higher bed. She's either hoping to catch me off guard, or on a hunch he pressed the girl's nose, prompting her to awake slowly, then suddenly stiffen in place. I'm sorry, she yelped, unable to move her frozen legs. It was Aya. I went to sleep and woke up here. Yep, it's Aya, he smiled, patting the alarmed adoptee on the head for reassurance. At least you're wearing clothes, he joked, chuckling when her face did an adequate job of imitating a tomato. Instead of doing the logical thing and attempting to clear the area, she buried herself deeper into the covers to hide her embarrassment. Sorry, Naruto pulled her back up by the collar, chuckling the whole way. He wasn't particularly angry, far from it, he was greatly amused. Looks like Alia likes messin' with her, he mused, or maybe she well ain't that cute? A foreign voice spoke, resulting in two previously resting individuals to bolt from the vicinity in opposite directions with amazing velocity. Shia practically glued herself to one wall, while the Uzumaki almost became part of the architecture on the other side. An awkward moment passed, and the blonde sighed in obvious relief. Oh my god, Garaza, he wheezed, don't do that again. She laughed heartily. Ah, that was great. Who knew you two were this close? We are not. Shia instantly retorted, immediately knowing that her words and actions were severely contradictory. That's Aya's work. Ah, gotcha, the Redeed winked as she strolled over to the relaxing girl before hooking her neck in a friendly headlock. The Nashin then spun around to the two females faced away from the undercover prodigy, so he couldn't hear them, despite the fact that Naruto's senses were well above average, oral senses included. Just so you know, she whispered with a mischievous grin to match the slight tone, it only hurts the first time. It, huh? Shia didn't understand audits like this, Garaza elaborated, keeping her snickering to a minimum as she whispered the inner workings of the facts of life to a reddening preteen. The instant she finished her brief informative monologue, Shia regarded the world with a blank stare, halted breath, and near all the blood in her body pooling into her skull. The blood user almost swore she saw steam rising from her protege's ears. Garaza, the blonde genius, berated the older girl, having heard everything from his distance. The crimson-eyed woman grinned and giggled as she released the disturbed girl from the half-embrace. What? No one else'll tell her this stuff. Besides, it's useful, she's 12. The Nashin adopted an overly airy and dramatic voice, looking off into the unknown distance in a humorous attempt at being profound. But love knows no age, stuff it. He scratched his nose in a concealed attempt to stem the impending bleeding. But you know, the blood user continued with a bit more seriousness in her tone. All that applies to silence, too. Normally, she would have been wary of implying a relationship between the dual geniuses, while Shia was within earshot, but the younger girl was still busy cupping her blazing red face and sorting. Naruto furrowed his brow and thought. Wait, so have you and Nurin? He trailed off in the hope that the older teen would comprehend the implication. She laughed instead. Nah. He'd be dead, she winked. The Uzumaki trembled in horror at that notion. Anyway. Garaza launched into work mode and dropped the carefree personality. I came here to tell you I found the root compound's entrance or exit, depending on how you want to look at it. Really. This captured his interest. How'd you find it? Your squad mate, actually. That gay albino sigh. Funny how he knew that based on such a derogatory description. Yeah, him. Nurin rug his ass and I interrogated him. He shouldn't remember anything, he doesn't. Neither does Sakura. Who Sakura Haruno medic, pink hair. Ah, Pinky, the Nashin understood that part. Cool, then. Our tracks are covered. Anyway, just figured you'd like to know. I know you guys don't like moving during the day, but I thought you'd want to know so you could plan on it. Yeah, thanks. Does Nada know this? Not yet, we're going over there right now. All right. A thought struck him. Hey, how'd you get in here? Use your tunnel. She jerked a thumb at the open trapdoor. Nurin's downstairs. He ain't compassed enough to climb a ladder, if you know what I mean. Not how'd you deactivate all the traps. Shia did the same thing once, but she possessed knowledge of the inner workings of seals. As far as he knew, Garaza did not. Yeah, she smirked apologetically and clasped her palms together. Sorry about those, the blonde deadpanned. What did you do? I've, kinda got some blood to spare right now. So yeah, blood to spare. She knocked against a piece of metal directly over her more private areas and commented, pair number 8. Extra blood metal underwear. That's the 8th pair. He added 2 and 2 mentally and scowled deeply upon deciphering the indirect answer. Oh, that is fucking gross. She chuckled lightly. Yeah, like I said, sorry. Mood swings aren't so bad in the mornings. Anyways, the Nation approached the open tunnel and crawled down the embedded ladder. See you later. The section of floorboards that served as a hatch clicked back into place, leaving the blonde and auburn-haired girl alone once again. Uzumaki sighed. Can't I have a normal morning for once? Is that too much to ask? He turned to find an immobile she is still contemplating what Garaza told her. You okay? She didn't budge, not that he could blame her. The teen approached the girl and tapped her on the shoulder. Sea seekers, she stuttered, a sure sign that she was embarrassed as all hell. Her mouth gaped like a fish and the words wouldn't come. She still vividly remembered the birds and the bees as the Nation called it, and the fact that the male object of her affection stood 3 feet away with his attention focused on her didn't help matters. Subconscious struggling to deal with the overload, her eyes rolled back, and she fainted or would have if her head didn't suddenly snap back into place. Her eyes blinked and Aya was in control. The second self brought her index fingers together and tapped in a way frighteningly similar to Hinata's shy girl visage. But Aya was all but introverted, her lips were contorted in a cunning grin, and her eyes stared at her occupied fingers in a disturbing way. So that's how it works, she stated quietly, stealing a brief glance at Naruto. A trickle of blood ran out her nose, and the alternate mints it promptly passed out. The blonde caught the collapsing girl and gently placed her on his bed. He stood and sighed while mentally reviewing the aggressive personality's comment and facial expressions prior to unconsciousness. This could be trouble, he muttered. The last time Aya passed out from shock, she made a habit of crawling into bed with him during the dead of night. Now that she was subtly armed with the knowledge of how certain anatomical parts worked and where they fit, he feared for his future. I wonder if Garaza can make me some metal boxers. Anko took it easy today, still worn out from her little jog the previous day. She and her old friend Kurenai sat at an outdoor table of a small cafe on the ever-busy main market street of Konoha exchanging small talk, so the Mitarashi summed up, you and Asuma, eh? Sure, kept that one quiet. The Yui blushed ever so slightly. Yes, drop it will you? We don't care to announce it to the world just yet. Fine, she assented before a devilish grin spread across her lips. Of course, you'll be announcing it if you leave your window open. Anko the snake charmer got a good laugh out of that. She loved teasing her friend over the dating scene. Hey, you walked into that one. Ugh, you're incorrigible. She took a gulp of tea to stem her temper. What about you? She changed the subject. I never see you with anyone. You trying to hide someone as well? She laughed it off to downplay that comment, but the attempt came off rather pathetic. Not, you kidding me? It's the single life for me. Kurenai arched an eyebrow. Really? She replied apprehensively. Are you sure? You seem to speak rather highly of a certain someone. Who? She chuckled, positive that the illusion user was joking. Oh, you know, a man with no name and a mascot. No sooner had she stated the insinuation that Anko reflexively spurted a mouthful of tea on her. Shit, sorry. The Mitarashi apologized immediately and moved to wipe off some of the mess. It's fine, the Yui pursued the injustice no further. Her friend didn't mean it. Looks like I got my answer though. Here, I'll do this. She shooed the hesitant snake mistress back into her chair and continued to mop up with her own handful of napkins. Looks like someone is in denial, she cooed with a mischievous smile. No way in hell, come on, you trust the guy and follow whatever he says. Are you sure? You wear yourself thin looking for him almost every day. Are you sure that you might not have just a tiny little crush on the guy? I am positive, she stated slowly to exemplify her point, although her mind knew Kurenai had provided a set of valid points. Wait, why do I place so much trust in the guy? I don't know who he is, where he's from, or even what he looks like. The logical portion of her brain then offered a rebuttal. Well, he did take out Takemi, I'm sure of that much. I remember enough of that bitch to know that she wouldn't have just let him destroy her guitar without a fight. But could he have been acting in his own interests instead of the village? What if he had a personal goal that just happened to benefit Konoha? Would that make him any less of a threat? And what about Danzo's orders? Curse seemed to want to put that old fart away for good for defying the Hokage. But could he be driven by personal motives this time as well? Why is he willing to do so much for nothing? You awake, Anko? The Yui's voice pulled the woman back into reality. She shook her head to clear it. I'm fine. What was that long pause? The crimson-eyed woman leaned in closer and lowered her concerned voice. Huh? Oh, nothing. You know I was kidding about you having a crush on Curse, right? What, hey? She pushed her off. Enough of that. There's nothing there. I just want to know who he is. That's it. She shrugged. If you say so. An awkward moment passed as the longtime friend said nothing before Anko broke the silence. Hey, why exactly were you summoned by Lady Hokage during that meeting, HM? Oh, nothing really. Kakashi told me a long time ago about some concerns he had with his student Naruto, and I happened to have a few worries myself at the time. It was nothing, though. Her snaky eyes narrowed. You had a few worries about Naruto Uzumaki? Oh, no, they were about some strange behavior from one of my students, not him. Which one? The Mitarashi felt a breakthrough emerging. Hinata Hyuga. Hyuga? She recalled the teen in question. You mean that shy one? Yes, she nodded and set her cup down. Have you figured something out? Her eyes scrunched up in concentration. Maybe. The Uzumaki kid was targeted by Danzo for his abilities. She checked her phrasing so as not to violate any special laws. Could the Hyuga girl also be targeted? Why would that happen? Anko returned a blank glare. You're kidding, right? Sorry, she shook her head. What I meant to say is, why would Danzo target someone that is such a high priority on the security list when he has ample opportunities with someone who is not? There's a lot more Hyugas that aren't so well protected. I dunno. The snake charmer shrugged. Maybe to tip the balance of power? She is a VIP as far as status goes. Maybe he's trying to shake up clan business. Kur and I leaned forward to discuss the matter, further not noticing a figure that paid close attention to the pitifully unguarded debate. Said person was a monstrous individual who towered over many of the village's inhabitants, the infamous super pervert Jiraiya. When the two females began talking about things that should have remained in the shadows, he listened intently with a growing smirk. Heh, women do love to talk after all, he congratulated his intuition as the conversation dragged on. After a while he lost interest. Their musings were going in a circle, but he had gleaned one amazingly useful piece of information that was a large piece of the puzzle. A second target, eh? He chuckled inwardly. I remember hearing rumors of a silent river alongside all those cursed wind stories. A wide grin exploded on his face, and he strolled off. I gotta confirm it first, but if my hunch is correct, kid, you are one lucky bastard. Hinata sneezed mightily before activating her bloodline to scan the vicinity. Weird, I don't have allergies. After a moment, she nodded her head in satisfaction of her solitude. Good, not even an Andu patrol around here. Closest person is over a mile away. She hid amongst the overgrown grass in a slight clearing surrounded by gargantuan trees. The Hyuga desired absolute privacy at the moment. She was here to practice a water-based technique that would aid her arsenal immensely and exponentially compound her control of a battlefield, when coupled with the acidic fluid that could melt through anything. Silence wished she could have done this sooner, but she never had a chance. Shortly after Naruto's completed assignment to retrieve Gaara, her assistant Hyuga, Chiori, had retrieved a copy of the official mission statements from all the Konoha teams involved in the operation, including Guy and his squad. In the report, the close combat specialist claimed that he and his subordinates battled a sort of clone of the missing ninja known as Kisame Hoshigaki. Said criminal apparently used a high-end technique to transform the battlefield into a fairly deep lake. Hinata had an idea of how the exploding water shockwave worked, but practical application was required to truly understand it. Since a ton of water was involved, she could not risk performing it in her handy practice tunnel due to the potential risks of drowning or, worse yet, revealing her position or identity. Of course, she was vulnerable out in the open, but no one was around. If I can just produce a small amount of water, then I'll be able to replicate the results on a large scale later. So as the hours passed, and the blue-haired genius trained herself to become a water-spewing machine, a certain old man observed through his trusty telescope well beyond a mile away. After a period of surveillance, the aging shinobi smirked and lowered his peeping equipment. So Jiraiya said to no one, just like I thought. Way to go, Naruto. He immediately spied the open-air hot springs and quickly replaced the portable telescope to his eye, while a minuscule amount of drool appeared from the corner of his mouth. Oh, what a glorious afternoon. As the night finally fell, the curtain rose on the lethal play, gradually taking place beneath the streets of Konoha. Curse made his way through his section of tunnels towards the familiar passage known as the hub to him and his fellow prodigy, excited as could be that tonight was the night he and the pale-eyed girl raided the root compound. He arrived at the rendezvous point quickly and surveyed the area with his heart pounding in his ears. The blonde looked forward to fighting side by side with the Hyuga girl again, and he wouldn't deny that to himself. Not now. He had spent a lot of time during the daylight hours thinking about how to break the news of the fox to the opposing genius. Eventually, he came to the conclusion that he would definitely tell her immediately following their nocturnal excursion come hell or high water. His sharp ears picked up a soft clanging of steel on stone, and he instantly knew the aforementioned teen was nearby. Silence stepped out from her respective tunnel into the dim light of the elongated shaft, with her metallic boots quietly clicking against the ground. She smiled so brightly behind her intimidating mask that she felt Naruto could see right through the centimeters of steel. "Hey, curse," she called and waved, using the boy's nickname in case anyone undesirable was listening. "Hey, silence." He returned and approached her, enveloping her in a quick bear hug and greeting. Releasing her, he stepped back a few feet and addressed her with a smile of his own. "So, Guraza told me she and Nurin found the root base's location. Yeah," she nodded. "Thanks for loaning them your teammates." She giggled at the notion of a stone. Sakura laughed. "Yeah, no problem. She never told me where it was, though I assume she gave you a map or something, of course." She tapped her head with a dainty finger. "I've already got the location memorized. Ready to go, ready as I'll ever be." He unsheathed a slim sword from one of the tattoo seals on his right upper arm. This was but one of a vast arsenal he carried in the vacuum of ink. "Then let's go." With that, both geniuses, Danzo sat in silence in his private quarters, preparing to sleep. Despite his relatively good health, he was still an old man who tired easily. His physical body was no longer as acute as his mind. He stood from the short table on his floor and strolled to his bed when he felt a presence approach his door. "Enter," he commanded, recognizing the chakra signature. The air shimmered, and one of the cloaked members of the root organization appeared in a subservient stance. "Sir, we have a situation." His face remained an impassively cold stone. "A situation, yes, sir. Well, sir, we think intruders have found our headquarters. You think?" he repeated with a widening eye. "What do you mean, you think? Is it the strongmen?" "We do not know, sir. How can you not know, sir? Do you remember when our forces began disappearing 3 years ago?" The old war hawk delved into his memories. "Yes," he nodded, recalling those frustrating times where his personal army literally began vanishing into thin air with no traces whatsoever. "That is an act of the strongmen. Is it happening again?" He grimaced at that notion. He didn't care to lose more ninjas. "No, sir." The nameless masked man shook his head. "The ones who disappeared are showing up again." The air was still as two shadows morphed across the walls in absolute silence. This time, the Konoha duo believed stealth over force was necessary. Even they had limits when it came to combat, and the root organization was known for utilizing underhanded tactics shrouded by the facade of sheer brute strength. If they were found, the enemy would most likely throw numbers at them until they fell. Hinata quietly led Curse through the dim halls and fed him instructions via hand signs. Not a word was uttered between the dual prodigies. Upon approaching the general vicinity of the hostile complex's concealed entrance, they noticed more and more patrols passing by. Thankfully, the two undercover geniuses hadn't been spotted, so they continued as cautiously as they could until they reached a surprisingly empty corridor. The Hyuga shot a thumbs up at the blonde, earning a shrug and a cock of the head from the boy. Noting his nonverbal inquiry, she aimed a finger at a section of the long passage which fell under a particularly harsh shadow. Naruto nodded in acknowledgement and scuffled his way over to the peculiar portion of stone. He pressed his back against the accused wall and took a deep hard look into the darkness, waving silence over when he determined her beliefs to be true. The girl imitated his movements and hugged the wall, careful to ensure that the modified yin and yang didn't scrape against the aged stone. She glared at the hole with her Byakugan and easily found the entrance. It possessed seals designed to ward off her bloodline, but they were primitive to her intelligent mind. Hinata rushed to the concealed door, while unraveling her enormous shaft of a spear, unfolded the double-edged weapon, and then jammed one of the blades in the barely discernible crease between the rock slabs. The blue-haired genius shot a pulse of chakra into the device and retracted it when she saw a pair of guards on the other side tend to the entrance upon feeling her natural energy. Before the barricade opened, however, she stuck her advanced spear into the ground and uncoiled the steel rope around her midsection. She had a plan. Glancing back, the Hyuga noticed the curse seemed to inherently understand her meaning. He crouched in the shadows beside her. The doors opened, and the duo sprang into action. Naruto jabbed his slim blade into the first ninja's neck before the enemy's mask was fully revealed, while Hinata swiftly subdued the other with her gentle fist style of close combat, trapping the unfortunate shinobi in a death grip with her metal coil. The blonde followed up his silent strike by aiming his elongated bloodied knife at the captured ninja's exposed neck, casually noting that the partitions of Silence's rope had opened and extended, effectively doubling the length of the strange machine. He also noticed that the genius girl's leather one-piece uniform, while loose around the joints, hugged her body underneath her normally concealed lower body. Holy mother, what's down here? Silence hissed at the captured hostile and received no answer. She tightened the coil in a bone, or the blonde paused for a moment in consideration, then moved his blade to the prone man's crotch, pressing the sharp metal in a bit to let the guy know he meant business. Answer the question, he ordered quietly. The masked man struggled to aim his face at the two. I will tell you nothing, Herc. He swallowed his shriek of pain as the Hyuga prodigy clamped a film-covered palm over his windpipe to prevent him from screaming. Naruto fulfilled his threat of manly torture. A few excruciating seconds went by, or minutes, it was hard to tell, and Silence released his throat. How about now? They're not off, yet a medic can still reattach them. I will not, arg. Once again his yelps were cut off, and this time his family jewels followed. He went limp from unconsciousness. Shitty way to go. Curse commented as he casually ended the emasculated man's life with a punctured throat. Let's move the bodies. Hang on, she held up a hand in a halting motion, while fishing out a tube from her belt. I've got a better way. With that, she gathered chakra in her mouth and belched forth a small torrent of water, a severely diluted version of the exploding water shockwave technique she attempted that afternoon. Then, utilizing her natural energy once again, she manipulated the particles of liquid to form a sizable sphere in midair and dumped a mouthful of the canister's Del substance into the airborne ball. Seconds passed as the water began to change color, and, when the girl pressed a finger to the sphere and emitted a tiny bolt of electricity, began to smoke as if boiling. Lem, borrow this, she calmly stated to the blonde, commandeering his elongated knife to slice long vertical slits into the dead men's bodies. After returning the blade, she focused her chakra to split the sphere in two and directed each half into the fresh corpses. The fluid obeyed, and the figures began to melt from view as the highly acidic substance disintegrated the display of their intrusion. Whoa, the Uzumaki's mouth gaped. That's cool, best way to dispose of evidence. Now, she stood, let's shut these doors before anyone notices. Sounded like Curse and Silence were speaking no more than 3 feet away to him. The man in the pale mask that hugged his face flexed his fingers in his seated pose. He had taken up position in one of the 2 abandoned vertical shafts in the crumbling sections of the tunnels. This was still inside the root compound, so his techniques were guaranteed to perform at full capacity while dealing with the geniuses. The notion that he was simply a diversion, a mere disposable pawn, fluttered through the silent man's mind, but he banished such thoughts instantly. It was not his place to question his master's commands. The mastermind knew far more than he. He brought his hands to the keys of his brilliantly elaborate instrument and gingerly pressed one of the keys. His ears, augmented by the doctor of his organization, easily detected the subtle change in the air's tune and the mysterious command that accompanied it. His marionettes scattered about the root complex straightened to attention in perfect unison. The masked individual Phantos, to those who knew him, began playing the melody of which few could hear, instructing his puppets to dance to the unseen melody. In the extreme distance, the Inuzuka family's dogs howled in the night, and Uraza cursed up a storm when she was jolted from her network of listening wires. Tonight's play would most certainly be a performance to remember. Naruto and Hinata moved swiftly through the shadows in complete silence. They had been exploring the newfound tunnels for a mere 10 minutes, but hadn't come across anything significant. Apparently, the root organization didn't keep much in the way of documentation. They hoped they simply hadn't happened upon it. Yet The blonde prodigy stooped at a corner and glanced at the blue-haired girl. She nodded to signify that her active bloodlines saw nothing, and they rounded the dim hallway with their palms grasping sheathed weapons. Trudging down the corridor, several entrances presented themselves along the way, and they took up position around the doors. The Hyuga peered in with her Byakugan and held up 4 fingers. The chamber was occupied with a quadrant of slumbering hostiles. Curse nodded, then focused some chakra into the floor through his armored sandals, and Silence noticed a handful of earth clones rise from the floor on the other side of the wall without a sound. The killing was rapid and quiet, only one voice squealed before the attached throat was pierced. The copies melted into sludge, and the dual geniuses entered the moment the chamber was cleared of hostiles. The place was filled with musty bunks and lockers. Hey, check it out, the Uzumaki whispered, bobbing his concealed head towards a desk against the far wall. Let's see if they've got anything. Hinata approached the simple furniture and analyzed it for traps. Satisfied that it was safe, she slid one of the short cabinets open and unearthed a handful of creased papers, while her blonde counterpart observed a smattering of pages tacked to a nearby bulletin board. She thought out loud, this is pretty sloppy for an elite group, tell me about it, Naruto replied as he flipped through the loose pages against the padded wall. This isn't organized at all. It's like looking at bounty notices. Hey, here's something. He yanked a freight page from underneath a solid layer of parchment. What is it? It's old, he began. Look at the date. A little over 3 years ago, she explained in an airy tone as she voiced her thought process. A few moments passed as the two continued to read the aged addendum. What's the strawman? Curse wondered aloud. Dunno, she shrugged, moved back to the desk, and continued shuffling through the scattered papers. Most of the documents were insignificant, much of it merely consisted of continuously updated inventories. She opened the deeper cabinet of the desk, extracted an armful of files, and began flipping through them to scan their contents. Wow, these are old, she commented. We weren't even born yet. How old? The most recent goes back 20 years. She shut the aged folder and slapped a palm on the stack. These are old troop movements of all of Konoha's ninjas. They're obsolete by now, but this means Danzo's probably been monitoring everyone this long. Think you can store this? The blonde smirked and opened the crimson outer jacket, revealing the system of seals embroidering the sturdy fabric. Leave it to me, he assured as he pressed a portion of the clothing over the pile, bit his thumb to add a drop of blood to the mark, and store the incriminating documents into the sewn seal. Since those are old, Hinata figured, there are probably newer documents hanging around somewhere. You're probably right. He briefly glanced around the room. But they're not here. There might be a main officer archive somewhere. Yeah, she affirmed the assumption. Let's go find it. Will do. The blonde teen opened the door to step outside, taking a quick look to ensure it was safe to exit. He nodded in satisfaction and began moving down the dark corridor with the Hyuga in tow, falling back so his female counterpart could lead the way with her superior vision, guiding their path. Silence did so without any goading or provocation. The masked duo moved swiftly through the root hive system unabated. Hinata noticed that the crisscrossing halls increased in density near what appeared to be an abandoned shaft similar in design to the hub nearest her hidden lab. If there's anything here, it'll be there. After a while of her Byakugan piercing the dirt and darkness, she finally found a cluster of interconnected rooms in the midst of several prominent tunnels. Focusing further, she saw that these chambers were of great importance. Weapon lockers, scroll racks, and multitudes of tin filing cabinets filled the spaces in an orderly yet claustrophobic mess. She stopped at yet another corner and nodded to the blonde at her six, while aiming a finger in the general direction of their quarry. Naruto chose this moment to voice a nagging. She peered in every direction she could with her advanced vision, then shrugged apprehensively. Truthfully, she was glad that they had encountered so little resistance, but something didn't add up. It's hard to see through everything down here, she replied quietly. There's too much stuff in the way. The boy nodded and said, all right, let's take advantage of it while we can. Right, she moved forward. But that doesn't mean I have to like it. Mura hit the floor and was instantly held in place by a dozen arms. His captors proved to be quite strong and in sync to an unnatural degree. He couldn't budge an inch. Of course, the fact that he was a little woozy only added to his situation, but there was nothing he could do about that. The gag was extracted from his mouth, but the blindfold remained in place. What is this? He demanded. Where am I? His reply came in the form of mumbling, tipping him off that he was next to somebody in a similar position. Hamura Kaharu addressed her former squad mate as her own mouth was freed from its confines. Is that you, Kaharu? What's going on here? With that, the cloth over the remainder of his face was lifted, and his eyes met the steel-plated boots of a smug individual. Who are you? The young man, dressed in incredibly thick clothes that should have impeded his movement, chuckled as he casually leaned forward and yanked the elderly woman's oral binding away before taking a wide-legged seat on the chair before them. My name's not really that important, he stated with an uneasy smile. Why did you do this to us? Kaharu commanded. She was also held down by a multitude of limbs. Do you know who we are? She threatened, briefly wondering if a kunai would pierce the fabric of the man's clothing without the aid of chakra. You betcha, the confident man replied with an ever-present grin as he opened a file pulled from a tabletop. Kaharu and Hamura, he read aloud, elders of the advisory council of the Hokage of Konoha. Then, you know how much power we have. The aged man spat. Release us now and I'll reconsider your immediate execution. He laughed lightly. Well, there's a bit of a problem with that one. You see, he discarded the document. I don't take orders from you guys. The gears in the elderly woman's mind turned. Did Danzo send you? Danzo? He chuckled. Certainly not. Although he aimed an unconcerned finger above them, presumably towards the men who held them in place. These are his boys. Gotta say, he stood slowly, you two put up one hell of a fight. Lost a few of these guys at your places, what do you want with us? She calmed herself a bit. Perhaps this stranger was open to reason, he didn't appear to be a megalomaniacal killer. Perhaps we can negotiate, Otto, but we will, he replied pleasantly and snapped his fingers. The captured elders were pulled to their knees to find the room lined with root agents, all of whom were arranged in perfect patterns, including the ones that restrained their mobility. Hamura's eyes narrowed. What is it you want? He was suspicious. Why would this man kidnap them in the dead of night and hold them in this manner if all he desired was simple bargaining? You must have some ulterior motive. I don't, but the boss man does. He turned to the smattering of attentive masked ninjas behind him and said, bring them in. Your boss? The old woman repeated, who is your superior? Is it Tsunade? Her voice rose when she considered that the Hokage might have been privy to the duo's scheming. Tsunade? He responded, turning a questioning eye to her before reluctantly shaking his head. No, but well, I guess so, in a real convoluted way. What do you mean? She arched an eyebrow. The rank of root agents parted in. My skills are enough, she claimed lifelessly, to guarantee your safety due to the terms of the agreement. What are you? He couldn't believe her level of speed. We are the gene hunters, she replied without stuttering. With that, she holstered the wooden steel device and dashed for cover in a flash, leaving behind a wide-eyed Danzo. The aged warhawk massaged his temples after a bout of staring after the shadows in which 23 vanished. Was he finally getting too old for this? How was this number 23 so far ahead of him? And what are these gene hunters for the umpteenth time? Naruto snuck around a corner before Hinata. The blue-haired genius already profusely confirmed the absence of inhabitants in the crowded sets of chambers, but a knot in the blonde's stomach told him otherwise. So with that in mind, the boy took point. After all, he was slightly more attuned to close-quarters combat than the Hyuga. But per usual, there was no resistance, the place was devoid of life, and instead brimming with junker. At least it would appear that way to anyone who didn't know what to look for. The Uzumaki nodded in satisfaction and motioned to the female teen that the coast was clear. Silence moved into the largest of the clustered rooms with a palm over her holstered energy weapon, but the hand left the device after several seconds when she found no inanimate traps lying in wait. She moved towards a gathering of tin cabinets and began systematically filing through them in search of serious incriminating evidence, while her companion rifled through the weapon lockers to liberate the Anbu agents of their stockpiles. The girl smirked behind her steel visage after noticing Naruto filling small storage scrolls and setting them aside one after another as he went through them like a snake through guppies. Anything vet? The blonde genius inquired, while keeping his azure eyes glued to the task at hand. Found some more files on troop movements, she answered, tossing the relevant documentation into a pile as she came across them. Recent ones too. How recent? He yanked a general order from the opening of the next locker, scrutinized it, and then crumpled it. Earliest is 2 months. Hello, what's this? What's up? Naruto merely spared her a glance before sealing an entire rack of scrolls in one bout. This one's got their internal assignments, she explained absent-mindedly while scanning the file. Looks like they had a sudden drop in membership too. If these figures mean anything. He halted, frowned, and stared at her. Really? When was this? About 3 years ago. This puzzled the Hyuga and concerned the Uzumaki. Exactly how long ago? Around the time we were fighting the Sound Army down here. Curse cocked ahead in thought. He no longer felt so secure, even for being deep within enemy territory. Silence interrupted his internal debate, her own worries much the same. You thinking what I'm thinking? Yeah, he nodded while scrambling to seal the final necessities for transport. Let's get out of here. His female counterpart agreed, and he quickly strolled to the door, assuming his friend's silence to crap. The lights of the monitors flickered next to the cushy operating table in one of the many labs deep underneath Konoha. The perpetually bored surgeon who hailed to the mysterious mastermind of the plot alongside Danzo's intentions glanced around in annoyance. Damn it, he swore quietly while tapping a cracked screen. I told Phantos this crap was sensitive. Silently cursing his coworker's methods, he cited the masked man's techniques, screwing with his medical devices. Why's this stuff gotta be so damn sensitive to vibrations? He halted his grumbled musings and gaped upon noticing the current subject on the table cracking its eyes. It was far too early for the newest product to awake. The mildly disfigured form turned its head ever so slightly and glared at its creator with a weary gaze. You shouldn't be awake. The doctor scrambled to locate more anesthetics. Phantos' methods must have somehow prematurely triggered the surrounding machine's reanimation cycle. The figure's mouth creaked open and hot air misted through the dry flesh. where the man spoke in a hushed whisper, "Am I?" For once, the bloodied surgeon couldn't believe his eyes. The experiment's internal organs weren't fully healed yet, throat included. The fact that this man was simply conscious was incredible, but the subject speaking was tantamount to a miracle. It revealed volumes regarding the sheer resilience of the man's will, alongside his inhuman resistance to pain. Relax, the false man of medicine regained his composure upon finding the desired drugs. "You're going to sleep for a while longer." He injected the hefty syringe into the patient's arm. "Don't want to sleep." His eyes fluttered as consciousness fled at the onset of the foreign substances. "Want to fight when the experiment succumbed to slumber," the doctor sighed. This subject was 3 years in the making, and if the leader's promises held any water, then it would finally be completed inside of a month. "Geez," the faux surgeon picked an ear as he returned to his instruments. "This guy'll be the most baddest gene hunter to date. Wonder whose brain the boss told me use?" He struck the inquiry that haunted him from his mind. What did he care about a personality within a recycled brain from cryostasis? Silence. Naruto called as he twisted in midair to plant an armored Jetta sandal into another oncoming mask. "What do you see there everywhere?" Hinata returned while twirling her unfolded spear and sending electrified droplets in all directions. "They weren't here a minute ago." A pair of the masked hostiles descended upon her with a sword in each hand, and she activated Yin and Yang's electromagnetic field. The ensuing wave of repelling energy shot the steel weapons away, along with their users who somehow didn't break their grips. The Uzumaki swore under his breath as he unsealed countless salvos of shuriken against the enemy shinobi to little avail. A quartet of masked root ninjas took the full brunt of the attack to shield the others, but it didn't slow them down in the least. Peppered with glistening ninja stars, the combatants lunged forth in perfect unison and form, their arms outstretched to embrace their target in a bladed embrace. The blonde countered the oncoming foursome by switching places with a nearby. The Hyuga didn't need to glance at the source of the sudden conflagration. Her superior eyesight saw in all directions simultaneously. Her modified shaft spun from its center on her wrist as she danced in a manner befitting her family name, the blades on either end whistling through the air as they clashed with hostile weaponry and deflected them with brilliant sparks. The veritable sphere created through the constant graceful flailing of her elongated armament slowed when its wielder noticed her enemies reconsider engagement and circle her like a pack of lions around a wounded calf. An idea struck her, and she brought her free hand to her face to initiate a special technique while continuing to hold the combatants at bay with her other limb. The spear became visible as its velocity lowered, and the ring of hostiles rushed in to confront the girl only to convulse as fist-sized orbs of water glowing with lethal electricity slithered off Hinata's armor and splashed onto them. The lightning coursed through their veins, and they stood stagnant for a moment before succumbing to death and falling to their knees. But Silence had no time to revel in her victory. A hail of kunai tagged with explosive paper flew her way. She dove into the standard defense of her family's repertoire and sent the incoming metal away, only to have them engulf the nearby stone surfaces in fire. The blue-haired girl curled into a ball so her armor could protect her from the flames, but it was still damn hot. "Silence," the blonde called from his position. He was coming to the same conclusion as his ally. Every clone he created was disposed of rather quickly, many weapons were expended with unsatisfactory results, and nothing short of an instantly fatal blow would even slow the combatants down. "Are you okay?" She emerged from the fireball, shards of stone having scorned her body through the exposed portions of her leather underclothing, and the edges of the heavy steel plating and grills adorning her frame glimmering with heat. Her limbs trembled as she ran her fingers through a rapid succession of seals and dosed herself with a torrent of liquid suck from the surrounding environment. Yet she coughed from the dry air flowing through her lungs. "We got her a treat." She hated to admit it, but there were simply too many enemies who were too coordinated, and the intelligent pair possessed no information about how these enemies functioned. "Let's go." Rather than reply verbally, the blonde leapt into action, tossing arm-sized shuriken in various directions to clear a path. The root members easily dodged around the weapons or batted them aside without pause, only expending a few extra heartbeats in doing so. But such time was welcome to the fleeing duo. They charged hell-bent through the throngs of enemies descending upon them. Hinata twisted in mid-stride to aim her eyes at the fellow teen behind her. Curse was doing his best to hold off the following hostiles, but any clones he created were dispersed in what would amount to suicide attacks should said advances actually result in mutual fatality. The organized crowds of root members didn't seem vulnerable to physical ailments other than death. Grimacing behind her visage, she ran her hand through a series of seals and yelled, "Curse!" Duck. The blonde obeyed and flattened against the floor as the female prodigy thrust her hands forward and invoked dual streams of water. The strings of liquid spun around her arms as they increased in size, before spiraling forward in a small vortex of fluid and crashing into the pursuers. Unable to withstand the pure force of the technique, the hostiles were flung back through the corridor as said hall was drenched. Thanks, Naruto shouted before realizing that the Hyuga left her back open. He righted himself through his arms to the forefront and molded his chakra to manipulate the dry hot wind. Gotta weaken this technique so I don't hurt Hinata, he observed, checking his reserves to achieve the desired results. His patented 9 tornadoes kicked into action, and a harsh whirlwind began gusting from his body. He flexed his extended fingers, guiding the sudden cyclone around the girl before him and directing it down the hallway, slowly filling with hostiles. The horizontal twister slammed into the root agents and flung them back through the elongated corridor, while carving harsh gashes into the granite walls. Oh, Hinata was speechless, cool. The instant the technique subsided, she continued down the cleared opening and proceeded to navigate the maze they had gotten themselves into. Her Byakugan noticed the object of her affections following after her, while slapping explosive tags with longer fuses to the walls in order to cover their escape. The ensuing explosion marked the beginning of blurred events that ultimately led to the dual geniuses exiting the compound. The prodigies rushed like panicked rats through the maze of corridors, the Hyuga's advanced eyes detecting a frightening amount of enemies pouring from every nook and cranny like roaches after the apocalypse. But she needed not voice every viewing of combatants, it wouldn't have made a lick of difference. Besides, Naruto was doing his best to counter the showers of iron with his own sealed steel weaponry. She smiled upon determining that the blonde was aiming to protect her from the onslaught, although she immediately squelched the rising affection in favor of surviving this nightmare. These guys are crawling out of the woodwork. Geez, I didn't think the route had this many members. After a harrowing handful of minutes, the duo finally located the heavy gates which served as both an entrance and exit to the tunnel complex. Hinata moved to the side to allow Curse to tackle the doors. She might have sported more muscle than many of her fellow females, but the blonde was naturally predisposed to be physically stronger. As he pounded the weighty slabs open, Silence spun her unfolded staff to deflect all the oncoming projectiles, frowning when a ring of kunai dug into the stone just short of her rotating weapon. They all started sparkling, and she spun on her heel. Exploding tags? Naruto responded in the blink of an eye and grabbed the teen in a tight embrace. The knives exploded in a massive conflagration and showered the two in hot stone and blistering steel slivers. Fuck, the blonde screamed as he retracted his hands to extract the searing shrapnel. Shit, this burns. Come on. Hinata urged him through the gates now that the explosion forced them open. He might need medical attention, and this sure as hell isn't the place for it. Helping the boy limp away, she detached a thumb-sized device from the back of the energy weapon's holster, flipped a switch on it, and tossed it to the ground between the doors. Run. She reserved this tiny explosive for special occasions only. Its ingredients and electrical parts were horrifically expensive, extremely rare, and insanely difficult to construct. Right now, though, escaping was far more important than hanging on to a costly bomb. The blonde complied with stiff arms and ran like hell alongside the blue-haired girl, stumbling when a violet flash of thunderous flames rocked the tiled stone floor. His breathing quickened when he began systematically yanking the shrapnel from his arms, and the Hyuga graced her soft fingers over the mildly burned flesh to heal his injuries. Thanks, he mumbled, enjoying the gentle touch from the girl he admired. No problem, she answered while keeping pace with him. Let's just get back to my lab for now. 2 hours later, the dual geniuses sat in relative safety in Hinata's private chamber. Both prodigies had gone over the events of the evening and decided that their findings should make their way to Anko and, eventually, Tsunade. Naruto scratched his arm, his recent injuries now completely healed thanks to the fox itched like crazy. You know you heal really fast, the Hyuga commented innocently, changing the subject. I've never seen anything like it. The blonde's mood fell, the blue-haired teen's remark struck a chord. Well, it's now or never. He took a deep breath, stared intently into the petite girl's eyes, and spoke quietly. Hinata, there's something I need to tell you. This caught her attention. He was nervously serious. What is it? It's about, he scratched the back of his head. It's kinda about that, you know, the story of the nine-tailed fox, right? Yeah, she nodded. What about it? Well, it was never killed. The fourth Hokage managed to seal it away, and it cost him his life. She frowned. Really? What happened? He eased into a deeply hesitant explanation about what happened that night, or at least as much as he could conjecture. He believed he made it abundantly clear that he wasn't the demon itself, but this was a testy issue for him. It wasn't easy for him to bring it up at all, and if there was ever one person who was guaranteed to accept him as he was, he prayed it to be her. Naruto was like any other man. To be sure, he was extremely intelligent and possessed top-notch fighting and sealing skills, but at the end of the day he was susceptible to normal human emotions. Feelings such as love, anger, sorrow, and disappointment were very much a part of him, and there lied his weakest aspect, the fox caged behind his soul. Whenever the malevolent monster was involved, the blonde's mind weakened and his emotions flailed in irrationality. The very reason he hid his true self from the village originated from the fox's presence within him. In a way, he was paranoid when matters pertaining to the demon's existence were concerned, especially when it came to others' perceptions of him. Should they become aware of the beast? It didn't help matters that Hinata was important to him. He had agonized over this moment for so long out of fear that there was the possibility she would reject him based on circumstances beyond his control, and that very notion scared him. Please God, he uttered a silent prayer to heaven, please don't let me lose her. Only her, that's all I ask. The rest of the world can reject me, but please let her accept me. Meanwhile, said Hyuga took it all in with ever-widening eyes. That's it? She finally pieced it all together. His healing abilities, his bottomless chakra. It all makes sense now. Her sharp mind began recalling every instance where he pulled his naturally energy from nowhere, and how his extensive wounds, both serious and inconsequential, would heal as if by magic. The tail end of those memories made her wonder about how all that extra chakra could be invoked seemingly at will, and that led her to ponder who or what Naruto was. Sadly for both of them, this extreme irrationality and overt logic left the Uzumaki quietly calling Hinata's name. Hinata? He asked in a low tone outside her field of inattentive vision. Hinata? He had experienced this trance-like state before, but the girl never told him it was habitual. Besides, a few attempts of speaking to her usually snapped her out of it, but not this instance. His voice grew quieter with each vocal outburst rather than louder. Hinata, please answer me. Naruto, the girl finally replied with a blank gaze into the void. Can you be sure this was it, the moment of truth or despair? Be sure of what, that it's permanently sealed away? Yes, he grimaced, it can't escape. Sadly, he didn't know this for sure. He recalled one moment in particular that he didn't clearly remember. Killing the freak known as Mosh Mosh when he and Silence were cornered. The death of that combatant was a blank slate in his mind, and all the evidence pointed to the fox. Then what about its chakra? That's I know you can use it. Her eyes still stared into nothingness. You use it all the time to heal, and in order to do that its chakra has to be deposited in your system. What keeps it from? It's not going to. His voice rose with desperation, and his eyes fell warm with moisture. Naruto, she turned her head and addressed him before glancing at the floor. That's I can't be sure about that. I mean, what if the seal suddenly fails? But it won't. His cheeks fell wet. You don't know that. I'm sorry, but I need some time to think about this. For the moment, she felt that she had to get the teen out of there. It was frightening that he possessed an unstoppable danger that could come forth at any time. Hinata, the blonde pleaded by grasping the girl's shoulders to make her look at him. That failed, but he continued anyway. I'm still the same person, I'm still me. She finally glanced at him, a string of fear dosed in sadness. How can you be sure of that either? If the fox can circulate its chakra in you, then what keeps it from influencing what you think it can do that? That's what he said, but the ever-logical portion of his mind knew he couldn't prove it. How do you know? Her face snapped to his, matching beads of moisture in the corners of her eyes. Her pale eyes shimmered in the dull light, and she looked away dejectedly. I'm so sorry, Naruto, but I just don't know enough about this, and it scares me. She felt his arms fall away and took a deep breath. I need time to think about this. The Uzumaki nodded in understanding, but his emotions were anything but. He sluggishly made his way from the room while holding his head down, so his bangs hid his eyes as best they could. His greatest fear had come to pass, and it was all he could do to keep from bawling away. Hinata was the most important person away. Hinata was the most important person to him, and now she was gone. He stalked out of the room while holding back a watery onslaught. His hands trembled as he undid the locks on the large steel door, and he slammed the hatch shut before running home as fast as his legs could carry him. Hey. Guraza poked her head in with a cocked eyebrow. Curse just ran out of here without even saying goodbye. Kinda looked like he was tearing up too. Hey, what's wrong? Silence's slim hands were cupped over her mouth, and her pale eyes watered. I'm so sorry, Naruto, she thought, equally saddened that she was no longer involved with the blonde. The male teen knew everything about her, and now she knew everything about him, and it terrified her. She wanted so badly to believe in his words that it was safe to be around him, but there were no guarantees, and a primal instinct deep within her soul told her to stray from the danger. In that singular moment, she cursed every emotion housed in her bodily frame for making her care so much about someone so hazardous. Her hands moved over her eyes, and she knelt on her elbows to pitifully hide the fact that her tears grew in strength. "It's nothing," She choked on the lie. "It's nothing." Naruto sat with his back to the wall of his private chamber, head huddled into his knees. He desperately attempted to stem the tide of salty water that begged for release, struggling with the conceived notion that Hinata had rejected him with her silence despite all rational thought. A few tears finally forced their hand and slowly trickled down his cheeks, but he resisted with a few choked cries. Said sounds attracted Shia's attention. She poked her head out of her room when the muffled noises emanated from the blonde, and cocked her head at his unusual behavior. "Curse," she began with a tinge of worry. "What's wrong?" He didn't respond verbally. Rather, he took several deep breaths and straightened his legs. He could only pretend to be strong now. But try as he might, he simply couldn't pull off such bravado. The result was a sniffling Uzumaki who sat with his legs akimbo and watery eyes that stared at nothing as they blinked the tears inward. This concerned Shia, and she approached the teen. "What's the matter?" she repeated, growing more concerned at her figurehead's withdrawn actions. She reached his feet and knelt to level her face with his, stifling a gasp when she found her hero's visage contorted in overwhelming sadness that had once been a part of her. "What's wrong?" She leaned forward. The younger girl's presence prompted the blonde's overflowing emotions to break. He shot his arms out and enveloped the auburn-haired girl in a tight embrace. Truthfully, it could have been anyone in front of him. Right now he desired nothing more than close physical contact. His chin rested harshly on her shoulder, and, for the second time in his life, his soul practically exited his body through his tears. The only time he had wept so hard was when he initially discovered the fox housed within him, so many years ago. At first Shia was shocked. Her mind and body froze upon the observation that Curse held her in such an intimate matter. It then noted his behavior. He was crying hard as hard, if not more, when she was younger. Then the realization finally sunk in. Working purely on instinct, the brown-haired girl wrapped her own arms around the blonde and closed her soft eyes. Internally, she was conflicted. On the one hand, she empathized with the teen and felt his sorrow. She had gone through similar strife in her own life many times and wished no such sadness on her savior. But on the other hand, she felt a bit of happiness that she could be there for him this time around. "I can finally do something for him," she thought, stroking his unruly hair with a gentle hand while saying nothing. And so this episode continued for what seemed an eternity. Naruto's tears would dry intermittently, but he refused to release Shia from the embrace. At the moment, she served as the only form of comfort for him. What seemed like hours passed, and he eventually cried himself to sleep. The next morning, Naruto found himself in a daze that refused to dissipate. He awoke several hours ago with a snoozing Shia in his arms, and figured the younger girl stayed with him the entire night. For the briefest of moments, a tiny smile escaped his lips. He was grateful for the auburn-haired girl being there for him, especially since she didn't understand the situation. That thought struck him as he silently prepared a breakfast of instant ramen. Should he tell Shia about the fox? He couldn't bear the notion that she might reject him as well, but he also knew that she saw him differently. To Hinata, he was an equal, someone who stood toe-to-toe with her in most categories. But to Shia, he figured he was some kind of sibling figure, or at least some kind of family. No matter what he did or who he was stuck with her for better or for worse. A blast of steam slapped him, and he broke that train of thought. It was too depressing to consider at the moment. He finished an armful of the instant noodles and set them on the table before taking a seat with an aimless gaze. Across him sat the preteen in question. The Uzumaki spared her a quick glance and found her returning stare filled with empathy? Remembrance? He couldn't tell anymore, so he dug into his meal for the perfect distraction. "Cursed," the girl began softly. "Do you want to talk about last night?" He sighed and swallowed. "No," he shook his head, "not right now." She twitched for a moment, and her eyes shifted into those of her second personality. "How about me? No." He repeated his moroseness with another shovelful of ramen. "I don't want to talk about it." The girl's eyes softened, and she regained control before nodding. She said nary a word and returned to eating, but her mind was brimming. "I know he'll talk to me when he's ready, but I can't stand to see him like this. I know whatever it is, it probably has to do with silence, but what could it be?" The two finished the cheap meal in silence, and the blonde grumbled something about meeting Kakashi and engaging in some specialized training. The disturbed girl perked up ever so slightly when he mentioned this, tossed the trash away, and began cleaning the kitchen, as if she had done it every day of her life. Naruto noted her willing generosity with blank eyes as he gathered up the necessary belongings and made for the door. But before he could leave the small apartment, he glanced back at the preteen and found her gazing at him again. Shia, his voice carried desperate hollowness, I don't know how long I'll be gone. That's fine. Her head bobbed with a content smile. She didn't mind that the blonde didn't know his schedule. She'd wait for him as long as it took. I'll be here when you get back. He nodded, then pried the door open. Shia, he added with a sad smile. Thanks. She returned the gesture and replied, happy to do it. When the object of her affections finally departed, she returned to her daily duties of cleaning the place, while an internal debate raged between her conflicting consciousnesses. Come on, I stated within her mind, you're not thinking of taking this lying down, are you? He doesn't want to talk about it right now, she retorted. When he's ready, he'll tell me what's bothering him. This didn't satisfy the aggressive personality. And what about all those times he was there for us? She corrected herself. He didn't exactly leave you alone, did he? The dominant personality mulled this over for a moment and interpreted that phrase in its own way, offering Shia an embarrassing yet appropriate solution that would repay the blonde prodigy for his kindness when she went through her ordeals. I just want him to be happy. If I had lips, they'd have been cracked in her trademark cocky grin. Don't we all? Hinata slumped through the morning. She felt miserable. She wanted nothing. She didn't have any missions that day, and that only made matters worse. There was nothing to occupy her time. For a while she contemplated venturing back into the root compound, but eventually decided against it. She wasn't effed? She wondered mournfully, preferring Naruto, but knowing that he was just as if not more dangerous than the hostile shinobi. Emotions of dejection flooding her soul, she wandered aimlessly through the village in search of a friendly face. Sadly, these were few and far between, but even she was surprised by the person who would alleviate her sorrow. Hey. It's you, Hinata, right? The Hyuga glanced at the individual. Temari? You're back in Konoha so soon? Yeah, she sounded embarrassed for whatever reason. We're having some problems in Suna and I'm here to personally request assistance from the Hokage. Problems? She repeated, praying to anyone listening that this could be the distraction she desired. The-san ninja nodded. A few disappearances that we can't figure out. She frowned. This sounded interesting. Why would you need Konoha's help? If they're just disappearances, then it shouldn't be an issue too big for you. Temari shook her head. A member of the village council was involved. He disappeared one night along with his bodyguards. Her pale eyes lit up. That's big, I know, she sighed, and we can't figure it out. Anyone who gets assigned to investigate it disappears for a day or two, then shows up wandering outside the village walls. I see. The Sand sibling took a deep breath to clear her concerns. Enough about me though, what's up with you? Haven't seen you since your mission to Suna. Anything new happen? She had to ask. Thoughts of the dangerous blonde came to mind, and she tried to squash them. No, nothing worth mentioning. Hey, a thought struck the foreign ninja as she strolled alongside the distraught Hyuga. You want to help us out if the Hokage will let you? Hinata forced a humble smile. Certainly. She was confident that Tsunade would allow several Konoha ninjas to assist their allies. So with that in mind, she accompanied the traveling team to the Slug Sannon and bowed politely when her prediction came true. Naruto and his tenant took a back seat in her mind, but thoughts of the blonde would still haunt her in her desperation. As the Hyuga exited the office, she passed the advisors Kaharu and Hamura with a polite nod that wasn't even returned with eye contact. It was rude, but Hinata contained her outburst in favor of her fresh assignment. For a moment, she wondered why the elderly ninja were visiting Tsunade in her office. They always summoned her to a more comfortable locale. Tsunade's strong though, she consoled her doubts. Besides, they're counselors under her command. They're supposed to answer to her. Tsunade sat at her desk in apprehension. What was going on in Suna? Why do I have so many problems? Is it not enough that I'm stuck with a conspirator with a private army and an organization that's targeting the 9 demons for some reason? She lamented over her proverbial plate, wishing that this entree of issues would go away. That bottle of sake Shizun Mist looked pretty tempting about now, but she checked the motion. There was still business to be done. Sai was due to pay her office a visit today, due to Kakashi's report of the boy being mysteriously stoned 2 days ago. She would have seen him sooner, but Kaharu and Hamura seemed unusually determined to waste her time with mostly inane prattle regarding the village's safety and future security measures. Damn fossils, she whined inwardly. I'm the one who's supposed to be calling the shots around here, not them. Before her mental rant could accelerate, the expected teen entered the room with calm uncharacteristic even for him. The blonde Yes, she replied without breaking eye contact. Kakashi told me that 2 days ago you and Sakura were drugged. I haven't had time to analyze a blood sample, but from what he told me, you ingested some kind of mild hallucinogen or sedative. Maybe both. She took a breath, wishing she could meet the individual who could concoct such a combination of chemicals. Do you remember anything? No ma'am. Any faces? No ma'am. Any voices? Did anyone ask you anything? No ma'am. His robotic voice began to wear on the aged medic's patience. The slug mistress rubbed her eyes to ward off the impending headache of annoyance. All right, she continued, deciding to switch gears. You have disassociated yourself with Danzo, correct? A slight pause ensued. Perhaps that meant something? Yes ma'am. Glad to hear that. Then you wouldn't mind telling me where the root base is? He nodded mechanically. Do you have a map? Her eyes narrowed at his willingness to assist in the downfall of his supposedly former employer's operations. Something's off about this situation, she mused while opening a drawer to her right. After a moment of fishing around, she produced a detailed street map of the village and laid it flat before Sai. The pale teen instantly aimed a finger over one of the many buildings dotting the parchment, and Tsunade analyzed the location. The root compound is located in a system of tunnels that originate here. Bullshit. The boy cocked his head ever so slightly, but did not shift a single facial muscle. I'm sorry, he inquired to convey confusion, although his tone could have fooled her. The blonde Hokage grimaced. Crap. I got ahead of myself. Keep your cool, Tsunade. Her negative response was instantaneous, because the hive Sai spoke of actually belonged to the Anbu Force's hidden network. Every inch of that hive was memorized by heart by the ninjas residing within. I know for a fact those tunnels already exist, and that there's no one in there. She lied, then glanced at the pale teen, only to frown at his bizarre reaction. His face remained impassive, but his head trembled ever so slightly, as if suffering from the mildest of seizures. The slug Sanin was about to rush to his aid, but squelched the motion when his unusual action ceased, and he stared her in the eyes again. Then you have not searched closely enough. It's closely guarded. She furthered the fabrication. It's undeniable fact that the root organization isn't there. Then you have not searched closely enough, he repeated. That, combined with his absolute impassive attitude, was the straw that broke the camel's back. Fine. The medic's voice was lined with nearly palpable rage as she fought to control the urge to kill the boy for insubordination and borderline treason. She raised a fist and aimed a finger at the door. Get out. Sai said nothing as he obeyed. He exited inelegantly, passing Sakura in the hall. The pink-haired shinobi took his absence to mean she could speak with her master. Entering the room, she gulped audibly upon feeling the waves of anger emanating from her superior. Lady Tsunade, she began nervously. Are you free at the moment? The blonde Hokage slammed herself back into her chair, heard a crack as a piece of its wooden frame broke, and promptly ignored it. Yeah, what? The Haruno smiled hesitantly and attempted her best to lighten the mood. Her master was obviously pissed beyond measure. Well, he isn't as responsive as before. An awkward silence passed as Tsunade considered. Explain, she demanded without an ounce of grace. When, Naruto, she took deep breath and started over. When Naruto first convinced Sai to give up his past training, he honestly tried to connect with people. He would try to make conversations with total strangers and make an honest effort to befriend them, or at least be civil. The slug mistress took this with a grain of salt. And when I saw him today, he didn't even say hi. I've been accompanying him around the village, and he hasn't even smiled, not even that fake smile he used when he was first assigned to Team 7. The aged medic listened intently, while calming the fires of her rage. Perhaps there's really something wrong with him. But it couldn't be an illness. I've never seen a disease that affects willpower. No, someone must be manipulating him. Threatening him, perhaps. No, that couldn't be it. His old training makes him impervious to personal threats. That leaves only one option. He's being physically forced. I don't know how, but that makes the most sense given what I've seen of him. Her multitasking mind put together the pieces of the enigma that was Sai before addressing her subordinate. You said he began acting like this today. What about the day you were drugged? Sakura blushed in embarrassment. She had yet to forgive herself for being duped so badly in that incident. No ma'am, he was fine until today. Yesterday? She wanted to confirm every bit of potential evidence he was fine then, too. So it's an overnight case. Something must have happened last night to cause this kind of behavior. But what on earth could do something like this? She closed her eyes and nodded satisfactorily. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Sakura. I'll take a look at him when I've got time. Thank you, Lady Tsunade. She bowed before starting for the door, stopping short of leaving to voice one final inquiry. Is there anything I can do to help? I think this one's out of your range of abilities, she lied. The last thing she wanted was more people becoming personally involved with anything related to Danzo. I'll take it from here. Yes, ma'am. The pink-haired girl exited the room and strolled down the hallway, wondering why her master seemed to want her gone. Why was she so insistent I not be involved with my own teammate? Is there something else going on here? While the Haruno contemplated the situation, the blonde slug mistress sighed heavily and stared at the village map still on her desk. I know he lied about the route headquarters being there, she knew, but was the fact that it's underground a lie as well? It would certainly make a better base of operations for a covert outfit, but the Andu compound is the only tunnel system that we know of. She sat back in her chair, produced a small bottle of sake from one of the drawers, and took a quick swig. What could? Walter's eyes went wide upon an epiphany. The only tunnel system that we know of. Could there be another system that's never been recorded? She shot from her chair and headed for the archives in search of the original blueprints and dusty journals of the actual construction process. Both series of documents were of the highest classification that only she had authorization to review, but they were currently the only things she could think of that might contain answers. It was a long shot, but there was a tiny possibility of a second hive woven around the already existing tunnels that had never been documented. Anko Mitarashi wandered the village streets in a state of undue paranoia. She felt eyes glaring into the back of her skull, but couldn't pinpoint the perpetrator. It was an unnerving sensation knowing that someone was spying on her, while simultaneously being unable to locate the offender. So she strolled through the streets in search of a face familiar with the strange goings-on that had been occurring lately. Anko, such a person, answered her silent call. "What are you doing out and about, Kurenai?" she exclaimed with false joy. "What's up?" She slung an arm around the woman and whispered in her ear. "I'm being followed. Help me out here." The Yui's eyes went up in surprise for only a moment before returning to their previous state. "All right," she went with the flow. "Who's following you?" "I don't know." They now walked uncomfortably close down the bustling street. "I don't even know if it's one person. It's like having a camera trailing you or something." Kurenai frowned. "Should we tell Lady Tsunade about this? It could be involved with She hesitated before reverting to an unofficial code name, Dango. Anko considered this before shaking her head. "I don't think so. At least Danzo's goons have a presence. These guys don't. It's like a ghost moving through the crowd." She eyed the passing civilians with mild scrutiny. Were they really so oblivious? Or were the stalkers simply that good? "Come on," the illusion mistress made the decision for her friend. "We'll go tell Lady Tsunade about it." And with that, the pair of female ninjas made their way to the Hokage Tower. The moment they entered the extensive compound, they rushed to the Slug Sanon's office, only to find the woman in question missing. Naturally, they panicked. "Where the hell is she?" Anko spat in her frustration. "Did someone get to her?" "Please." Kurenai rolled her eyes at the woman's paranoia-induced antics. "She probably stepped out for a minute. She'll be back." Shizun's hesitant voice began from the door. She didn't want to interrupt anything important. "She's down in the archives right now. Let's go." The sweets lover exclaimed before bolting out the entrance. The illusion user sighed and calmly followed after her overly active friend. She knew she had to take things easy for a while. Sadly for her, so did the invisible eyes watching the female ninja's every movement. When the sunlight waned and the daylight hours morphed into night, Naruto climbed into his sleeping bag at the training ground. The day had been filled with training, and he was able to keep his mind off the Hyuga some of the time. He attempted to forget about the previous evening by pondering the groundbreaking training methods suggested by Kakashi, but even that only provided a few seconds of peace. Even his eventual conquest of disrupting a waterfall didn't carry enough weight to ease him. He felt miserable. As he closed his eyes and tried to sleep, he still couldn't get her out of his mind. Damn it. Why? He felt a few hot tears emerge and sniffled before turning his gaze to the starry night sky. He glanced at the brilliant moon and instantly regretted it. It resembled the Hyuga's colorless eyes. Even the damn moon. The blonde continued to stare at the sky, contemplating what he should do from here on out. He couldn't be with Hinata anymore. She had made that abundantly clear. So what was left? There was no one else he'd ever even heard of who could match his fighting prowess and intellect. Were there really none others equal to him? He knew he could become Hokage should he put forth the effort, but was it worth being powerful if it meant being alone? He didn't know the answer to that, and he wasn't sure he wanted to. Uzumaki tossed and turned in his sleeping bag and almost jumped when he almost butted heads with a friendly face. "Shia," he exclaimed in no more than a whisper. He didn't want to wake Kakashi and Yamato curse. She smiled at him, then unzipped the human-sized rucksack in a single motion. "Scoot over." "What are you?" He never completed his inquiry before the auburn-haired girl slid in next to him and zipped the bag up again. It was a tight fit even with her small frame, but in a way her close presence was welcome cozy. She snuggled up against the blonde and buried her face in his jacket. Naruto put his arms around her. Where else could they go? Shia, what are you doing? He whispered. What's it look like? She glanced up at him with blazing cheeks and giggled at his loss for words. This was working out better than she hoped. To be sure, it was embarrassing to be rubbing up against him, but at least he had seemed to temporarily forget about silence. I missed you, so I came to see you. The blonde blinked away his bewilderment and smiled in return, although the gesture was lined with melancholy. He tightened his arms around her, glad that she cared for him as much. Her smile lessened a little when she heard the sadness return to his voice, but she willed herself to remain upbeat. He just needs to know that someone's there, she knew, just like he was when I was like this. The Uzumaki rested his chin on her head and took a deep breath, his morose thoughts flooding back into his brain. This comfortable situation only reminded him of how he wished to hold Hinata like this one day, and he felt tears well up, since he now knew it would never happen. He was so lost in his inner musings that he didn't even note the subtle increase in temperature on the auburn-haired girl's back. He did, however, notice when the girl pulled herself upwards and nuzzled him on the neck. Shia, what are you? The second personality gazed him with what could have passed for a blank stare, but such a move for her meant something completely different. Without a word, she receded and left behind the primary mentality to deal with the consequences. Shia instantly blushed like a rose and stuttered, sorry. Naruto stared at her for a moment and smiled. He could tell she was embarrassed by the actions of her second self, but not entirely ungrateful for them. It's fine, he consoled her by unburying a hand and gently scrubbing her unruly hair. She glanced down, and her blush seemed to deepen. It was hard to tell in the moonlight. Sea curse, she stammered, a sure sign that she really meant whatever she was about to say. I don't know why you're sad, but I just want you to be happy. She buckled under his soft azure gaze, then continued. I'll always be your. The blonde silently regarded her a moment longer before replying. Thank you, Shia. He brushed aside the hair covering her face, leaned forward, and kissed her forehead before returning his arm to the embrace. Thank you. Long minutes that felt like hours passed, and the two eventually fell asleep in the cramped sleeping bag. Little did any of the campers know that an analytical eye observed this entire scenario through a familiar telescope. Jiraiya rubbed his chin and thought, looks like something's up. Good thing I decided to keep up on him. Tsunade was frustrated. 2 days had gone by, and she still hadn't made any headway into locating the root compound. It wasn't for a lack of effort, though. In fact, she had made a few startling discoveries, sort of. The slug Sanin had pored over blueprints and plans for so long that she wanted a fresh perspective on the lack of evidence, which was why Anko and Kurenai now stood in her office. Anything on the people following you? The Hokage began. No ma'am, the sweets lover replied while her friend merely shook her head. Well, hopefully this will have something to do with them. She produced a thick folder, unraveled its contents on her desk, and beckoned the female ninjas to give it a once-over. Technically I'm the only person authorized to see this, but I think I can bend the rules a little. Here. The Yui was the first to speak. These are plans for a tunnel system, right? System? We have a tunnel system? The Mitarashi was surprisingly ignorant of this fact, given that she once called Orochimaru teacher. We do. Tsunade adopted a stoic mask. These are the original blueprints of the tunnels that serve as the Anbu headquarters. Noting the women's shocked glances, she continued. These plans date back to the founding of Konoha under my grandfather, Hashirama Senju. So what's all this? Anko inquired, handling the other loose papers. Reports from when the tunnels were being constructed. Notice anything unusual? The Mitarashi crossed her eyes, trying to find an answer. Right. The Yui's voice became distant. Why is that? That's why you're here, to help me figure this out. Hey, here's something. Anko interrupted. Now that she knew what to look for, she could be of some use. Looks like there was an eyewitness at one of the accidents. Tsunade cocked her head. I missed that. Is there a testimony? Yeah, it's the next page. The snake charmer shuffled back and forth between a stack of papers with an increasing frown. Where the hell is it? It should have been the next page. All three women began scouring over the documents, only to eventually come up empty. The illusion user was the first to voice concern about it. She's right. It's missing. See the page number? It skips the next page and picks up right after it. How did I miss that? The slug mistress berated herself. Guess that's what I get for pulling an all-nighter. Lady Tsunade, if I may make a suggestion, go ahead, she sighed. Are there any files on this eyewitness? She nodded. Should be. All the workers were shinobi, and all shinobi are documented. Are they in the archives? Anko inquired. Not in the restricted archives, but you don't have proper clearance. Here, the Hokage stamped a sheet of paper with her personal seal and handed it over. Show that to the guard, and he'll let you in. Understood. She took the slip and exited with purpose in her step. So Tsunade addressed Kurenai, what do you make of all this? I'm not sure. I don't see how it's related to being watched, and there's no way it can be related to Danzo or Root. Is there a possibility that it's just a coincidence? The head ninja leaned back in her chair and sighed. I have reason to suspect that there's a second tunnel system in Konoha that serves as Danzo's base of operation, but I can't be sure. There's nothing documented other than the system designed by Hashirama. The Yui considered this for a moment before providing another point of view. Perhaps the first intended for these tunnels to be diversionary, while a second system would serve as the real base of operations. Then why the accidents? Why would people disappear? And I know that the first would never sacrifice people for the sake of keeping a secret, so how do you explain the deaths? She shrugged. Maybe the Sector 6 is unstable. It lies underneath interrogation headquarters. Oh, that was one of the most secure establishments in Konoha, and no one had ever reported any problems, at least not in her lifetime. Then I'm out of suggestions. Tsunade rubbed her temple to stave off the impending headache. Why did she have so many problems? Well, on another note, she changed the subject. When are you due? Kurenai smiled and put a hand to the blast doors were now repaired and firmly shut. The rusted gears and demolished hydraulics been replaced, and there was even a camera installed in a corner. Silence grimaced behind her mask and handled the energy weapon at her hip. She knew the instant she made any kind of move, stealth went right out the window. A tiny part of her brain whispered that it would be infinitely easier and safer with Curse, but she broke that train of thought by squeezing the trigger on the portable weapon. The device buzzed with power, and she rounded the corner and aimed it at the camera the instant it fired. Her arm felt warm in the steaming air when the blast of light came to being. The smoke cleared to reveal that the small tool of surveillance was reduced to a smear of molten slag against burnt rock. Her sharp ears picked up a faint wail of klaxons from the other side of the blast doors. She holstered the cooling energy weapon, reached for her folded spear, and whipped it open with a flick of the wrist, before jamming one of the blades into the minuscule crack of the barrier. Channeling her multiple generators' energy into her arms, she released it as a magnetic blast through the embedded blade. The sheer force of the move pushed her back a few inches, and she swore under her breath upon finding that it didn't do a thing. The blast doors remained closed, and the glaring sirens howled from within. Silence panic for a split second. Crap, they know I'm here? What do I do? Her legs froze in place for a moment before accepting commands from her brain. She scooted away from the double steel doors and, once several feet away, began running. Hinata tended to logically think things through, but this time her instincts told her that whoever was waiting on the other side wasn't worth the trouble. As the blue-haired genius neared the exit for the extensive tunnels, her blood limit picked up movement on the fringes of its vision. She swallowed as she clawed her way out. Her gut feeling might have been right. Whatever had responded to her presence, it was monstrous. And it wasn't alone. She would need help, but who was there to turn to? The first people that came to mind were her teammates, but she quickly disregarded them. Kiba, for all his ferocity, relied on extreme close combat. If Danzo's possessed ninjas were anything similar to this threat, enemy teamwork alone could take him down. Shino was an intelligent guy, but his tactics relied on outwitting his opponents and wearing them down to the point of defeat. The masked ninjas dwelling underneath Konoha never showed signs of slowing in the face of certain death or physical ailments, so if the enemy was the same way, they would be a disastrous match for the bug user. Silence burst from the hole and charged like a bat out of hell into the night. A sense of dread rose in her chest when one of the overwhelming forces continued its pursuit outside the tunnels, so she fed chakra into her legs to put down some distance. That plan worked, giving her a few extra minutes to formulate a plan. Out of desperation, she headed towards the abode of the first person who came to mind. Tamari slept peacefully. She was dreaming of being in the lush landscape of the Fire Country, with a certain lazy ass by her side. It wasn't altogether unpleasant, so she reveled in it while she could, that is, until her window exploded. She shot out of bed fully awake and aware, and stared at the mass of glistening metal and leather, before reaching for the closest weapon. Get your fan. A feminine voice emanated from the figure as it held out a hand. We've got a problem, you bet we do? She darted from her position, grasped her fan, and attempted to smack the intruder upside the head in one smooth motion. The wind user wasn't particularly surprised when the stranger countered the slab of metal with nothing but a forearm, but she became horrified when she couldn't pull back. Squinting to pierce the dark, Tamari raised an unconvinced eyebrow, but glanced nonetheless. Her eyes widened to the size of dinner plates when she found what the stranger meant. A backlit shadow rapidly moved towards the room, its outstretched arms almost hidden by a ragged pair of wings that flapped on occasion to keep it airborne. The sand sibling backed up when the newcomer slammed into the windowsill and gasped at the sight. It was a woman probably in her 20s with orbs of ink for eyes and fangs for teeth. Her short hair was a muddled mess that failed to cover her elongated ears, and the wings appeared to be fashioned from cartilage and membranes. The woman resembled a bat rather than a human. What the hell is that? Tamari stammered, barely catching the fan as the armored stranger threw it back to her. The woman's head twitched too. She glanced at the blonde teen. She loosed an ear-splitting screech and followed it up with flapping her malformed wings to thrust herself back into the night. Chakra began building in the grotesque flesh and flew forward when it caught the breeze. The wind user stood awestruck at the monster before receiving a slap on the shoulder from the other stranger. "I'm Silence," Hinata abruptly stated. "Help me take that thing down, will you?" She stared at the girl and nodded in apprehension. Her instincts told her that this would be a fight to the death, regardless of which side she chose, so she might as well choose the side that didn't look like it would immediately eat her. She opened her fan and swung it, and the instant later, the wall separating the freak from the